Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Martha Rosenberg. She is a health reporter. Today's Kevin MD article is Conflicts of Interest Are Eroding Trust in U.S. Health Agencies. Martha, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Pho. I always appreciate the different points of view that your podcasts show because there's so many different opinions.
Well, thank you again for coming on and sharing your latest article. What led you to write it in the first place, and then talk about the article itself?
Well, what led me to write this is I'm very aware of conflicts of interest in all of the government agencies, NIH, CDC, and FDA. And I kind of believe it's underreported. And so then I feel that I have a mission to report it.
Mhm. So, tell us about some of these conflicts of interest that you are seeing.
Well, recently with the new administration, Robert Califf left as FDA commissioner. He had 51 financial links to drug makers. In my humble opinion, as a reporter, you cannot regulate big pharma when you're funded by big pharma. It infuriates me. And he's not the only one. I don't want to single him out. Under Trump, the first time we had him, we had Scott Gottlieb, who's a Pfizer doctor. And then we had Califf, who I just mentioned. But they're really, Dr. Pho, it's almost as if there are fewer officials who aren't funded by linked to big pharma. And so I wrote in this latest article about the CDC Foundation. Most people aren't really aware of it. There's a CDC Foundation and also an NIH Foundation. Both of them are chartered to make private-public partnerships with big pharma. And to me, that's just wrong. So that's why I wrote the article.
So it sounds like a lot of these leaders in our governmental health agencies, you said that were previously linked to big pharma, and of course that leads to several conflict of interest questions. So give us a specific example or a case where that conflict of interest really hindered their ability to lead their agency.
I'll talk about Julie Gerberding. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Gerberding. She was head of the CDC in 2009. And see, this is very wrapped up, Dr. Pho, in revolving door. She left CDC and went to work for Merck in 2009 and had a Merck department. She came back to NIH in 2022, and she now heads the foundation of NIH. What we're dealing with the revolving door, which one of its problems is when you leave there, if you are now with industry, many people go back and lean on their colleagues. Hey, we had lunch together. Now, you see this a lot. And so I consider her kind of a poster child for conflicts of interest,
Mhm.
Dr. Julie Gerberding, because her departure for industry and return to government is maybe the most glaring.
So are these conflicts of interest, are they identified during the vetting process? Are they transparent, these conflicts of interest? What kind of reporting is normally done, or what type of disclosures are typically made?
That's a good question. Some of the officials will say they've recused themselves for that exact reason. The connections are somewhat looked at by lawmakers, and some of the officials with pharma links will say they've recused themselves. Dr. Califf, who just left as FDA commissioner, said that he gave all the funds to charity. And I would say that's not the point, you know, but there is some awareness, but not as much as I would like to see. I think that one thing I've often talked to you about on your site is advertising. And my background is advertising, which is why I'm so oriented toward drug ads. And what we see a lot is advertisements have almost engulfed and almost captured the news media. News media now is not going to bite the hand that feeds them. And consequently, you don't really hear some of these things we're talking about. And I recently wrote, not for your site yet, but I have another piece coming up about this eye drug that they're really marketing on the radio here in Chicago. And when you look at it, they're spending so much money that it's almost obnoxious. Every 5 minutes you hear this ad.
Mhm.
And when you research it, the research on the drug was all funded by NIH, funded by us, the taxpayers, and now the advertising is coming from the private industry. And so what we're seeing is a lot of the conflicts of interest exist in advertising as well, and because so many media are now captured.
And these conflicts of interest are prevalent throughout both Democratic and Republican administrations. Is that correct?
I think so. I think there are inherent risks of the whole. And I might add too, Dr. Pohl, that if these agencies such as FDA were funded properly, they wouldn't need to take some of this industry funding, or wouldn't need to as much. One thing we talked about years ago is PDUFA, in which the drug makers would pay FDA to approve their drugs. Well, think about that.
So tell me more about that. You mentioned PDUFA, which is the 1992 Prescription Drug User Fee Act. You said that this is kind of a pivotal moment in the story. So tell us more about that act, about why it was such a pivotal moment for those who aren't familiar with it.
The concern back then was that drug makers would buy approvals. And I can't say that it hasn't happened. A lot of people, even in our industries, Dr. Poe, don't realize that CROs exist, and those are contract research organizations that take charge of all the approvals for drug makers. And so they now will they'll get the drug approved through FDA. But the concern is that you would buy an approval. And I have to say, since I've been covering this for quite a while, that many drugs that come out that make a lot of money for Wall Street are then withdrawn because they weren't really safe anyway. Kind of like, I always make this joke with like a bad movie,
Mhm.
like until people review it and say it's a dog, everybody goes there. And I think with drugs, we see a lot of approvals that shouldn't have gone through. And I hate to say this, but because of how much a patented drug makes, the legal fallout is covered in what they've made for it. So buying approvals obviously is connected with dangerous drugs being approved that maybe we all regret. So there is a lot of concern with the FDA connections. It is supposed to regulate drug makers and keep the public safe.
Now, in the past, have any of these leaders of health organizations been called out for their conflict of interest? Has anyone gone into trouble or been dismissed or resigned because of overwhelming conflict of interest?
No, I have to say that most of the revelations about COIs, is what we call them, conflict of interest, are kind of ex post facto, after the fact.
Hmm.
I will say, and I don't mean to attack doctors, but I do think that taking industry money is a conflict in terms of public health. One example that came out was Dr. Margaret Hamburg used to head FDA. And she, in 2011, was lamenting the fact that so many doctors were funded by Big Pharma, either through their stocks or through their research or through their position at a university, that she could not find non-affiliated doctors for advisory committees for FDA, which is, pretty bad. And then when she left there, they showed conflicts of interest that she had too. So it's almost like nobody's unscathed. And I've attended FDA advisory committees, and it's shocking how much how better funded industry is in our government. That's basically the nexus of it.
Now, what do you say to the argument that sometimes without industry money, research wouldn't be funded at all? So, if some doctors aren't sponsored or funded by the pharmaceutical industry, they may not be able to have their research proceed.
That's a good question. I would submit, first of all, we need better funding for actual valuable health research that helps people from the government. Secondly, I would say let's look at what we're investigating here. Some of the research, like one example I'll give you, some of our top universities in the world are now literally partnered with Novo Nordisk, who makes a GPL-1 agonist. Okay, so the research funded by that that drug maker is, of course, going to say it's a great drug, right?
Mhm.
So I would say, let's look at what the research is addressing. Do we really need it? Is obesity really such a world US problem, or is it maybe fast food advertising? But in answer to your question, we do need money for research, but I would say let's look at what are we researching here? And who is profiting from it? Who's going to have, here where I live, Northwestern University will hand their research over to industry, and they'll make, well, the best example is this eye drug funded by, and the research was funded by NIH, and then the profiteering is drug makers. So I would say let's look at what we're studying, who's profiteering from it, what's the 10-year plan, not just the 6 months plan. And you're right, we do need more money for research, but I would love to see some kind of committee that evaluates the validity of the research. Is this really even necessary? We need that.
In your article, you wrote that there are three pharma lobbyists for every member of Congress. Is that true? And tell us about that scope of pharma-powered lobbying.
Well, it is a true fact that we've seen revealed that there's three lobbyists for every doctor. One statistic I saw recently that just shocked me, because I'm very against drug advertising, is 70% of US adults are on a pharmaceutical drug. Now, that was not the case before DTC advertising. So that's another issue that we have to look at. But I think it's just very significant that the lobbying, well, obviously we all need money. There were some really great breakthroughs in lobbying about more than 10 years ago, where some of the drug makers would fly a whole medical office to the Caribbean. And some of that has definitely been highlighted and regulated. And that's good. That's very good. And when I used to go to medical conferences, all the beautiful people became pharma reps because people wanted to meet the cute guys and the cute girls. That a lot of that has been stopped. They used to give a lot, maybe they still do, but a lot of free samples of a new drug to an office. And some of these things have been improved. I will say that they've been improved.
So tell me the path forward. What would you like to see in terms of clearing up the conflict of interest among our health regulation leaders?
First, I would really like listeners and viewers of public, of media, news media, to be aware of the fact that all these so-called epidemics and dangerous diseases are funded by drug makers to sell drugs. Right now we're seeing a push against AFib and COPD. Oh, you may be suffering that. No, actually, that's fun. That's unbranded advertising from pharma. But I would like to see that parlay into a greater awareness of the footprint of drug makers in our government, in media and our government, because it's appalling.
We're talking to Martha Rosenberg. She's a health reporter. Today's Kevin MD article is Conflicts of Interest Are Eroding Trust in the U.S. Health Agencies. Martha, as always, let's end with some take home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Well, thank you. I would like people to be aware of drug advertising and be aware of the drug footprint in our government agencies, CDC, NIH, FDA, and to become outraged when we're not getting good medicine.
Martha, thank you again for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for your good work.